But that was a great testimony. I was particularly pleased with that testimony because it made me look like a spiritual wise guy, which is always good before you're about to talk. It kind of gives you authority. So yes, the Holy Spirit, a traveler's guide. Well, I wanted to start this morning by posing a little question to you, which is simply this. Why do we need to hear from God? I mean, if you look around, you're a pretty amazing bunch of people, and you're living at an amazing time in history. We are doing church in the most powerful nation probably the earth has ever seen. You have a voice in that power. Even if the democracy is not perfect, you have some voice in the power of this nation. You may not feel it, but you are well educated. You're not quite top flight anymore. I'm sorry about that. That's reserved for the Asian tigers like Hong Kong and Taiwan who outstrip you. But you are a well-educated bunch of people. Despite the recession, you're wealthy. The average American's wealth amounts to about $144,000. That's 100 times higher than, say, somebody living in India. You'll live long. Life expectancy in the US 100 years ago was about 48 years. Despite the healthcare system, you have a pretty good chance that whatever sickness comes your way will be healed. You can fly anywhere in the world, see anything for relatively little money. You can communicate with anyone, more or less anywhere. I once climbed to Kilimanjaro. Kilimanjaro is a high mountain. It's about 6,000 meters. You're getting to about base camp Everest. And I was climbing up, and I felt like I was an explorer. It's more of a steep walk, really, than a climb, but it's a serious altitude. And as we got near to the top, somebody's cell phone went off. It was his wife in London calling him. And that shattered the illusion. Half the world has never made a phone call. If you own a car, you're in the top 10% of the world. You're intelligent, you're extremely good looking, you are well nourished. You have problems, but you're facing them. I don't know you all that well, but I know that in our small congregations we have serious scientists, we have people building affordable homes, we have actors who've been in films, independent businessmen and women who've made serious businesses. We have a wealth of experience and talent. You're amazing. I'm pretty amazing too. Yeah. So why do we need to do this thing of hearing from God? This thing of listening and understanding a God who can speak, is this something, an activity which is reserved for charismatics and Pentecostals? This part of the church does it, but this part of the church does not. We do it because we like it, but they don't have to do it because they don't like it. Is that the way it works? Well, I want to tell you, begin really this morning by telling you my story. Like most of us here, I came from a relatively comfortable, middle-class-ish background. And I had pretty much everything that I needed. I was extremely well educated. My parents gave me just about whatever I needed. We weren't wealthy, but we never went without food, put it that way. But my father was a career man. He was away for most of the time. He looked back at his diaries. He was away for about 70% of my life, my young life. And my mother had come from an aristocratic British background where basically all emotion and feeling is repressed. And somewhere around the age of 10, I made some very, very poor decisions. It's amazing how young a child can start to make bad decisions and how that can have implications for the rest of your life. So I started to make bad decisions, and the bad decisions basically went like this. I hate my father. I hate him, I hate him, I hate him with a passion. I want to drive him out of my being. I want to drive the very thought of him out of my life. And this began about the age of 10. And I started to withdraw myself from the world, from my family, from my parents, from any friends that I have. And I became increasingly isolated. That isolation developed over the years, through the teenage years, the normal teenage stuff, into serious depression. By the time I got to the age of 20, 21, I was what you might call chronically depressed. Most of my life was spent in battling this thing, this cloud that I was under. Every day was a struggle. I'd want to sleep all day. Not just the sort of normal youth type stuff, but I just could not function or live. And the thing is, I started to look for a way out. That's what you do. When you're caught in something, you try and find a way out. And you do that from within the experience that you have. That's all you have. The only way you can figure your way out is by what you've been shown So I started to try to do that. So I started to do that through experiences of all kinds, and I'll leave that to your imaginations. But nothing could break the power of depression in my life. But come with me in your imaginations. As part of my experiences, I sort of got involved with theatre of one kind or another, trying to live the actor's life. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Don't you mishear that if anybody here is an actor this morning. But it was really, in me, it was just simply trying to find myself, which I think it often is. But one time, I had gone to work for an opera festival. And this opera festival took place in Tuscany, in Italy. So now we're in a warm and beautiful place. And against this old monastery, deserted monastery, was an opera festival set up by an Englishman, and he used to gather together artists, and we'd all go out there, build stages against the walls, drink wine, make merry, and have a good time. And I liked to do a rather strange thing. On the stage that we built, at night, I used to like to go and sleep on that stage. I don't know why. I just looked up at the stars. I wasn't a spiritual guy. I wasn't interested in God. I'd never explored Buddhism. I'd never explored anything. But I used to go and I used to sleep on the stage at night. Now, here's a young man who hates himself, who spent most of his time thinking how he might get rid of himself. So I'm lying out there, and I don't know what time it was. In the middle of the night, I wake up. And as I wake up, I hear a voice, so plain, so clear, and so loud that I literally get up and walk around to see who has spoken to me. And that voice says one word to me. It says, Adam. Now, my name is not Adam. It's Matt. But in that name and in that moment, it was as if I had been totally known, totally loved, totally encompassed, and totally affirmed as a son, as a man. Adam. You are Adam. And I knew, and this is somebody with no church experience at all, that God had spoken to me. God had spoken to me. And I was so excited. The next day, I tried to tell people about this experience. Not a faith community of any kind. Nobody understood. And I forgot about it. That's what you do. I've heard so many stories of people whom God has spoken to before they came to faith, years before. They know what's going on. The Spirit has spoken to them. And yet somehow they managed to forget for 10 years. That was my case. 10 years later, and I haven't got time this morning to tell you the whole story, but I'm in a Christian festival. How did I get there? It's a long story. But I did end up finally at a Christian festival. Now I'm hating this whole experience. I've been taken there by my girlfriend, who'd just become a Christian. It's full, forgive me, of Americans. Now, my assumption of Christianity is that it's loud and American. And it's evangelical, which is really bad news. And Americans and evangelicalism in Britain does not go down well. So I'm sitting in this crowd of people, maybe 2,000 people, and there is a preacher from Texas. I don't know if anybody's heard of it, a guy called Ed Cole. And he's a sort of stubby man with stubby little fingers. And he gave this talk, and I didn't believe anything that he said. I hated him. I hated the worship. I hated everything. But there came to a point in the talk, and I'll never forget, where he raised this little stubby finger. His stubby Texan finger went right up like this. And he said, I know that there are people here who need to give their lives to Christ. Christ, who is a second Adam. And at that moment, that experience came back to me, and I remembered what it was like to be totally known, totally loved, totally accepted. And I went forward, and I did the normal thing. I could not find my way out of my circumstance, no matter how hard I tried. I needed a God who is outside of our lives, of our circumstances, to speak into my life. You see, God's opinion of us and our abilities is slightly lower than our own opinion of our abilities. God does not think that you and I can fix the real problems of the world. We can fly to the moon, but we don't know how to cure poverty. We can put tiny little robots in people's bloodstreams to cure sicknesses, but we can't cure the sickness of loneliness. You cannot give meaning to a teenager through science. We'll never do that. You see, the Bible points to a very old-fashioned notion called sin. The world is not the way it is supposed to be, S-I-N. When I say the word sin, if you are outside the church these days, you are likely to think of chocolate or some other delicious pleasure. If you're inside of the church, you think of other people outside the church. That's the way it goes with sin, isn't it? But let me broaden the picture of sin a bit this morning. Let's not just think of sin in terms of immoral acts that people do. Yes, that's part of it. But sin is the thing that breaks our shalom, our peace, our well-being, the way things should be ordered in the world. That is what sin does. It's in the nature of sin to twist and distort the goodness that God has created. Sin rips apart things that should be together. It rips apart marriages. It rips apart families. And sin puts together things that should never have been put together, not part of God's created order. And at the heart of sin is a single thing. It's called self-sufficiency. And the problem for us as Americans, and I include myself as this, is we live in a culture of self-sufficiency. If you're middle class and you're American, probably one of the highest goals is you prove that you are self-sufficient and you're not dependent on anybody at all. That is a high, high, high value in America. The idea of depending on anyone else is hideous to us. But the whole story of the Bible is of a God who does not think we can find our way out of the pit that we have dug ourselves.